Good afternoon. Thank you. I know it's been probably a full day. I am Andre Singleton. I'm one of the alum from the New School. I graduated from Eugene Lang in 2011. I'm going to be reading folks' bios, but I also want you to also know that their robust bios are also in the program. So if you maybe missed something that I may say or just would like to reflect on it, please take your programs with you. Thank you to the Alumni Department for putting this together. Today's program is the work of social justice, the conversation, and we're going to be bringing alumni leaders in the fields of activism, organizing, and social justice together in conversation with Dr. Mindy Fullilove, who is the professor of urban policy and health, to discuss the presence and impact of social justice in their work. We are a little mixed up today, so I asked that when I read your bio, you just kind of like wave to the crowd. So first I'll start with the moderator, who's immediately to my left, to your right. Dr. Mindy Fullilove is a board-certified psychiatrist, having received her training at New York Hospital Westchester Division and Montefiore Hospital. After years of work as a community psychiatrist, Dr. Fullilove joined the UCSF Center for AIDS Prevention Study at its founding in 1986. Most recently, with support of a Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Investigator Award, she has studied the long-term consequences of urban renewal for African American people. As part of the work, she has co-founded NYC Recovers, which is an alliance of American people, which is an alliance of organizations concerned with the social and emotional recovery of New York City in the aftermath of 9/11. This project provided the data for her book, which is titled Root Shock: How Tearing Up City Neighborhoods Hurts America and What We Can Do About It. She has received many awards for her work, including being among the best doctors in New York, 2 honorary doctorates from Chatham College and Bank Street College of Education, and was made an honorary member of the American Institute of Architects in 2016. She joined the faculty of the Urban Policy Department at the New School of Engagement in 2016 as a professor of urban policy and health. First, we're going to have Evette L. Banfield. Please raise your hand. Thank you. Who earned an MS in Urban Policy Analysis and Management in 1977. She's the Vice President of the Economic Development Policy and Wealth Building Strategies Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development. Ms. Banfield currently serves as Vice President of Economic Development Policy and Wealth Building Strategies for the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development, CNHED, in Washington, D.C. There she facilitates the development and execution of CNHED's inclusive community economic development agenda through coalition building, policy, and advocacy. Next, Danielle Chynoweth. You're welcome. Holds an MA of Politics and graduated in 2000, is the Township Supervisor of the City of Urbana, Illinois, and is the former organizing director for the Center for Media Justice. Danielle is a social change artist dedicated to confronting the roots of poverty and violence. For the past 3 years, she has served as the organizing director at the Center for Media Justice, where she coordinated a national network of racial justice leaders to win political campaigns for net neutrality, prison phone justice, and broadband expansion for low-income families. She is also the recent elected Township Supervisor of Urbana, Illinois. Next, we have Ana Oliveira, who holds an MA in Anthropology and graduated in 2004, is the President and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation. Ana Oliveira is President and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation, the largest women's fund in the country. Ana is the co-chair of the New York City Council Speakers Young Women's Initiative and a Commissioner of Human Rights for the New York City Commission on Human Rights. She sits on the Independent Commission to Study Criminal Justice Reform in NYC and is on the board of Philanthropy New York. She has held roles as a CEO of the Gay Men's Health Crisis and is the VP of Programs at Osborne Association and Lincoln Medical and Mental Health Center Substance Abuse Clinic. Last, we have Irene Pedrelo Tapia, who holds an MA in International Affairs and graduated in 2015, is a lead strategist of DoSomething.org. Irene is a New York-based journalist and activist and a lead strategist at TMI, DoSomething.org's consulting arm. DoSomething.org is the world's largest organization for young people and social change. Over the past 4 years, Irene has produced long features, photo essays, and opinion pieces for magazines and publications in Europe, Latin America, and the US. She is the co-founder of Dos Millones de Votos Votos, which defends and promotes democratic participation of Spanish immigrants. She was recently named 2016 RISE Emerging Catalyst for her work fighting to reduce barriers to political participation. She has been a guest lecturer at the New School, and she was a Fulbright Scholar from 2012 to 2014. So this is our esteemed panel. Please give them a round of applause, and I'll get started. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mindy Fullilove, and does this turn on? Is it? Hi, I'm Mindy Fullilove, and welcome to this conversation among this esteemed panel. And so I have a list of questions that I'm going to throw out, and you can handle them and bat them back and forth, and then we'll do it that way. So the first question is really about New School. How did the curriculum at the New School assist you in creating an academic foundation that has assisted in effectively addressing social justice in your career? We would like to take credit for your achievements. Yeah.
I had a kind of conflictual relationship with the New School when I was here. It was 98 to 99, and it's been a process by which I've looked back and seen with deep appreciation, how the roots that I put down here at the New School and what I learned helped me to flourish as an organizer. So at the time I was organizing the mostly African immigrant guards here at the New School. I spent part of my time as president of student council doing that, and part of my time trying to get my papers done. But I want to give props to Nancy Frazier, because from her, I learned to ensure that the politics of recognition is always coupled with the politics of redistribution. And it's good for us queer families to be able to marry, but we also need health care. And I learned from Adolph Reed to watch out for race managers. During our fight for net neutrality, we had to show some members of Congress in the Congressional Tri-Caucus that none of them would ever have heard about the city of Ferguson if it had not been for the open internet that at that time they were opposing along with some of their funders. And so Adolph Reed really helped me to navigate those channels. I learned from Chris Hitchens, who has since passed, a way that many writers, journalists, and researchers are actually unacknowledged legislators, and that cultural change holds hands with policy change. And so I come back to say that the New School has been such a fertilizer for me and the organizing work that I've done, and I have deep appreciation for, kind of the career that, as an organizer, that it launched for me here.
To me, the New School indulged exploration. I think so often when you look at programs and master's degrees, like they seem to be like really constrained, and they seem to offer you these programs that you really and subjects, and offer you courses that you really need to kind of follow and take, and I wasn't honestly really sure about what I was searching or looking for. And somehow this seemed like the perfect place to actually do that, like explore and allow myself to do that and to feel that it was okay. So I did a master's on international affairs, but I did take classes at Parsons that have directly informed my work on documentary making, or I ended up also taking classes in urbanism. I was really interested in crime and the broken windows theory that for some people may seem a little bit random, that someone in international affairs may be interested in that, but to me it was just like so good at allowing me to be curious. It also exposed me to so many activists, and I'm originally from Spain, where the social justice field is not that developed, and suddenly I moved to the States and I came to such a special place as a New School, full of people who believe in fighting for what's right. So somehow that was really eye-opening and really inspiring.
So I was told I was told I didn't need to use the mic, so I'm gonna. For me, the school has, the New School has prepared me in social activism, social justice through the work I recall participating in lab and practicums, and also just from my experience at the new school with my fellow students between classes, I vividly remember sitting on the second floor landing, having these debates about politics, social justice issues, race issues. I see some of my schoolmates sitting in the audience, and it was for us not just the what we learned in the classroom, but I think what was happening outside of the classroom, challenging what our ideas were, and pushing each other about what it is that we thought were some of the impediments for communities. And the lab working and being assigned to specific projects, live projects working with a client, and really getting a sense of what the variety of options and opportunities to be engaged in social justice work. And then also the practicums. So for me, it was a bit of being in the classroom and learning from the instructors who had a wealth of knowledge, but in addition to that, it was also connecting with my fellow classmates who we're all kind of with the same ideals, and then also on the ground and getting that fresh experience.
Good afternoon. Let's see, I came to the new school, I'm thinking a long time ago, and I wanted to contextualize a little bit. That was 1981, and this building was not what it is today. And for those of us that were in the old building, you have a little bit of a memory of that time. And I thought the building was great, by the way. I had no idea that could be even so much more, I'm going to say, welcoming and user-friendly. At the time, I knew I needed to. I didn't come to get my master's right after my BA. I had been out of school for a while, so I had a very clear intention and need, and I was looking for a school. I was very leery of academia because I was looking for a school that would give me a perspective that could match social justice activism. That was what I was looking for. And I came to the master's program in anthropology. I was particularly interested in the tradition of critical anthropology and the thinking that came with that, which was, today I look at it as tools to deconstruct structures of power, structures of racial, gender supremacy, economic supremacy, etc., as well as Western thought supremacy. So I had a wonderful time at the new school because, as you just said, Evette, there was a community of folks, colleagues, where it was really important, the exchanges that we had. I do want to say that at the time, 1981, I was in new school from 81 to 84. The student body wasn't as inclusive as it has become since, has evolved over the years. It was beginning, those issues were beginning to be addressed in a more intentional manner, which pleased me tremendously that it has been. But the practicum was really important. Because of anthropology, I had to do like a year and a half of an internship. And that was a challenge. My field was medical anthropology. So I didn't think I could just go to a hospital or a clinic or something. So I went to the South Bronx. At that time, different from what it is now, much more underinvested, still underinvested now, but much more underinvested than it is now. And I interned in an acupuncture clinic that came out of the roots of the Black Panthers movement and the Young Lords movement. And I met Dr. Fullilove there. It was the beginning of the crack epidemic, and it was the beginning of AIDS. So this was very formative for me. So my experience at the new school, the need to be engaged in community, the need to be not in a, I'm going to say, removed academic experience was extremely formative and extremely important to me.
That's really, so, what was the Bronx like in the early 80s? It was crazy, right? It was crazy. Yep. How many other people were in the Bronx in the 80s? Yeah. Yep. Right?
You know what I mean?
Whoa. Still there. Awesome. We're all still there, right? Bronx is.
Cheap as rent.
Cheap as rent, right? Everybody's moving to the Bronx. Yeah. Forget Brooklyn. We're all going to move to the Bronx. So it's good to know the borough. But yeah, that's a real intense flashback. When you think about something as complex as the South Bronx in that era, and all the policies that had led to the crisis, all those crises, was more than one, right? It was the violence crisis, the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic. Bronx was really buffeted. It's sort of, this is the challenge. If you're going to be a university that sends people out into the real world and you're actually really going to teach them, you have to actually really teach them something, right? So I just wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more. Like, it's a good thing to send you out, but then how did the coursework complement that? And it's a little bit what Danielle was talking about, how she got some kind of foundation ideas here that also helped her as she was seeing things in the real world. I just wonder if I could, just because it was so evocative when you said Mike Smith's clinic in the Bronx. So this was the craziest place you ever saw. It was a substance abuse clinic, but they used acupuncture. So it was the real place that fought to make acupuncture an acceptable part of medical care in the United States of America. Before that, you couldn't do any Chinese medicine anywhere in the United States, and it was Michael Smith who did it. And we were both there watching it happen.
Yep.
So anyway.
So in terms of in the intellectual underpinnings and the learning here, is that the idea, critical anthropology is really about the observer versus it's against the objectification of the oddity in the world, the different people. It's really about understanding our own lenses, our own constructions of realities, our own archetypal approaches to the world, and with that, all of our assumptions, prejudices, etc. So it's a self-reflective and questions the relationship of power. So in that sense, in the South Bronx, it's a microcosm of those relationships of power where, for instance, at the time, Asian medicine was considered an inferior type of medicine to Western medicine, just as Latino communities, Black communities were considered less apt to rebuild themselves, to know what they need, to self-direct. So the same learnings that I was getting here around critical anthropology and around the other and self, and around intellectual domination and patterns of thinking that define the world and shape the world in those ways, I was deconstructing that in the realities of the South Bronx. It was a very excellent experience in that way. And I need to say, Shirley Lindenbaum at the time, Raina Rapp, Stanley Diamond were the folks that I came to study with, and so it wasn't very fertile. Somebody had talked about fertile environment to reflect back and to explore further. It was that's why I said was very formative for me in terms of a lens to look at it.
Would either of you like to jump in on things you learned here? In that way that Anna and
I was just
Danielle.
thinking about something I told a friend like a while back when I joined the new school, and I told him, I feel that my brain is just like a puzzle that is reshifting and is like readjusting, and I think that's what happened to me. It was mostly about learning how to challenge assumptions, and I think that right now, as part of my work do something that No?
Pretty hard.
Can you hear me now? Yep. Yeah. As part of my work for Do Something.org, it's actually
Is that better?
Yeah. It's been a lot of that, a lot of challenging assumptions and not assuming, for example, that young people are as apathetic as our media suggests, or that young people are as inactive as our media suggests. It's really like the work that Do Something does is about believing that there's a generation of young people that want to do something, that want to change the world, as idealist that may sound for some people, but that's what all our work is about challenging the assumptions and creating habits in young people so they actually do something in their communities and showing them that they can change things, giving them the agency for that. And I think that was something like core to what the new school showed me, or the new school gave me agency, right? Gave me power, so I could do things. And I feel that that's what I'm doing every day now.
Do you want to add anything, or we could go on to the next question? All right, great, because really looking forward to throwing this question to you. So this is very important, right? So you graduated in '97, and so you've been in the field for a chunk of time. And so the question is, how have you seen the need for addressing social justice evolve throughout your career?
So the span of my career to date, I have not worked specifically around organizing and advocacy and policy. I started out as a consultant. My experience here at the New School, just with the lab and practicums, sparked my interest to be involved in evaluation, assessment, and OD work. And so for a number of years, I worked with a couple of two different organizations, both nonprofit, one was for-profit, that was involved in working in urban communities around looking at community development initiatives and evaluating those initiatives. And so what's interesting is that, I was able to take my experience in terms of understanding communities and engaging and working with communities and residents. And that helped kind of to lay the groundwork for me to kind of be a consultant. Worked in places like Detroit, Cleveland, New York, and several other cities. And so I did that for a number of years. And of course, in doing evaluation, you have to understand what the issues are. You have to also understand the organization that's actually trying to affect change. And many of those organizations, their issues or the things that they're trying to grapple with are the same things that both social activists are also engaged in trying to change in many respects. The only thing is I was far removed. I am looking at the framework for how they design what it is that they were actually trying to affect change, and actually how they implemented that and how they evaluated or gathered information to be able to show what it is that they're trying to impact or move the needle on that they were able to do, and then propose recommendations or suggestions for how they could better resolve some of those issues and challenges. And then after doing that for a number of years, I wanted to make a change and not be the person who is doing the examining, but the person who is actually in the trenches doing some of the work. And so, and applying just everything that I've learned about neighborhoods, communities, working with residents, and understanding of the issues. And fortunately for me, I was able to land what I thought was a great opportunity because it was a position that was unscripted, and so it provided me an opportunity to kind of make a transition and move to DC and work for the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development around issues around community economic development, and designing a framework that would affect change and engage all of those actors or those stakeholders around looking at ways that they could affect change around advocacy and policy. And what, for me, is really unique about what I'm doing is that community economic development is not a place or an area that you typically see advocacy. It's usually around housing. It's usually around other social justice issues that really impact people directly. And this somewhat impacts people both somewhat directly and indirectly because it looks at issues of workforce. It looks at neighborhood commercial corridors and small businesses. And those, some people will think, oh, what does that have to do about activism? But it's bringing a lens or an understanding and a framework to, or pushing a conversation around those issues that actually help those neighborhoods become stronger, better equip the people who are in those neighborhoods that are often neglected.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I graduated from the New School right at the time that the World Trade Organization protests were happening. Raise your hand if you were there. Okay, raise your hand if you know about the protest, the Battle of Seattle in Seattle, Washington against the World Trade Organization protest. Okay, so there's a few folks. So, okay, so I think that this was the popular pushback against corporate globalization what we did, which was surprising even to us, is that we stopped the World Trade Organization's agenda in Seattle, and we did that using effective direct action that was creative and inspiring. I went to sing songs. I actually brought a whole plethora of songs that I had written, and I sang them on the streets. Other folks did other things. It's also the time when we saw the militarization of the police. It was a sneak peek in all the military equipment that was coming to police departments. That was really one of the first times we saw that. Later, definitely, we saw it in Katrina and Ferguson and Baltimore. So that was, and it was the birth of the indie media movement. And that was a movement pre-blog when we didn't have opportunities to publish online. We couldn't get our word out, and there had been such massive media consolidation since 1996, Telecommunications Act, that we were effectively silenced. And we face this now, right? Even though we can get it, that's another conversation, but where we have such a crisis in the media and communications infrastructure, which is such an essential piece of a healthy democracy. So that was the birth of the indie media movement. And it was also the birth of the World Social Forum movement. Who's been to a World Social Forum or a US Social Forum? Okay, just checking. I know there's kind of, I'm going to bring some movement history into the room, because that's kind of where it went when I left New College, is deep into social movements. And so the World Social Forum, which happened to this day, are convenings of social movements across the world to talk about what alternatives we want to generate for ourselves, and how can we have a different path than the neoliberal approach to globalization. Yes, globalization, yes, exchange, but not that agenda, not that particular exchange. Then 9/11 happened, and the global justice movement in many ways was stifled. And what we saw was the biggest protest in US history against the Gulf War. Who was there at the biggest protest against US history, trying to keep the Gulf War from happening? Thank you. New York City saw millions of folks. I was there. I got to meet Pete Seeger. It was awesome. He's my hero. And so we saw that essentially street protests were limited in their effectiveness. That was a big wake-up call for us at that point, and I think it's something that we should look at today. And I think that was kind of phase one, was the global justice movement, and phase two, since I left New School, has really been about the new civil rights movement. And it's been about netroots organizing and online organizing. And so with Hurricane Katrina, we saw an exposure to the country. It was very well known by many in that situation of poverty and racism within and we saw the birth of Color of Change and large netroots organizations that started to amass millions of contacts that they could mobilize towards local pressure. When there were killings of unarmed Black men, there was local pressure that was put by millions of folks that were networked using the internet. We saw the immigrant rights wave, and we saw the backlash to it, and what came out of that was groups like Presente.org, also Netroot Scoop. And when Obama was elected, that new civil rights group kind of helped get him elected. And I could say a lot of criticisms I have for the Obama administration and other areas, but for media justice, that was a very good time for us. We passed it. We won every campaign we were working on: net neutrality, prison phone justice, expansion of Lifeline, and we were able to change hearts and minds. We changed the chair of the FCC, who had come from industry. Actually, we were able to change his mind with over 1 million contacts to support net neutrality. We didn't think that would happen, and it was largely because of Black and brown people who came forward through our network to say, hey, the legacy civil rights groups do not speak for us. If you didn't have net neutrality, you wouldn't know Ferguson, you wouldn't know Baltimore, you wouldn't know what was going on. This is important to us. And then I would say the last piece, and that's where, in some ways, where we're at now, and where a lot of my hope is for movements, is with the movement for Black Lives. It's a relationship-based movement. It's truly intersectional. It's grounded in a politics of love. It's founded by gay Black women. You gotta love that. And it is integrating online and offline organizing. That work is also greatly under siege. So as we see the shock doctrine of Trump What's happening to the movement for Black Lives right now? They are under siege right now. They need our support and our protection. So that's kind of my short, movement history from the time I left until the time that we're here right now.
Can we go to you, Anna?
Yes. Would you tell me which question? I got into the movement.
Let's go.
I'm totally there with you, so I myself there.
Yeah. You've been part of a few of those movements and a few others.
Yes.
Having worked at Lincoln Substance Abuse and Gay Men's Health Crisis and now at the New York Women's Foundation. So you've been a part of many of these same social justice movements. And how has your work evolved?
So I wanted to say that I currently work in philanthropy. Philanthropy is complicated. Does anybody here work in philanthropy? Yes. So philanthropy, in my opinion, is that philanthropy is complicated. It's in itself an expression of enormous economic inequality. So that's what I mean, it's very complicated. And institutional philanthropy has a certain amount of power that it's disproportionate, I think, disproportionately allocated, just my opinion. So the foundation is a public foundation, it's a local foundation. When I say it's a public foundation, it is made of, we collect donations, we collect gifts, and we reroute them. It's kind of an instrument of collective giving. Think about it that way. And the other struggle of philanthropy is that, it can become so disconnected from the daily life. It has an enormous privilege, in my opinion, which is to be, we're not exposed by virtue of our jobs. We're not exposed to human suffering, and so that's complicated because the sense of urgency, the sense of complexity, the sense of, who creates solutions. Is it the people who are living or is it the people who are more removed? So the evolution for me, so it's I just wanted to say it's a complicated universe. At the foundation, we do believe that problems and solutions live and exist in the same place, so that the primacy of the engineering of solutions and the path forward is really in the hands and the lives of those who live where the problems are, who live them, who create solutions. And a part of the challenge overall is that folks are they're not seen, they're not perceived as credible engineers of social and other solutions, and they are not capitalized. So the idea of the New York Women's Foundation is to be able to see incredible human beings and organizations. So for me, that evolution, I never thought I'd be working philanthropy. I went from working at a clinic on a one-on-one kind of idea of transformation, because acupuncture is about that. It's about self-healing. The clinic itself was a community expression of saying, we don't want to deal with a heroin addiction with methadone. We want to deal with a drug-free approach that relies on rebuilding people from the inside out. So an individual community level intervention. And then I had the opportunity to work, in a variety of things, like in the beginning of incredible mass incarceration with the crack epidemic for men and women, but mostly and particularly 99% from communities of color, then AIDS, and it became important for me. The challenge was, where should I be? What should I be? I'm intervening too late. I'm intervening. Are there other things that can be done? So the appeal of philanthropy is that you get to direct resources. In our case, and I'm so happy that Evette has participated, we use a participatory grant-making process that, folk come, anybody, any of you could participate in that. We train people who do site visits, who go to communities, and then decide what the priorities should be. Of course, they have to be according to our fundamental values of social justice, racial and gender economic equality, but within that, So it's been an evolution to try to go at more instruments that go more at the root, personally. And I will say that, we were talking about the South Bronx. It's so important, for me it has been so important to look for things that bring people to community, as you were saying, Evette, going to the other side as well. So that it's been an evolution that way.
Yeah, Evette, she called you out that you go to visit. Well, what are those visits like? It must remind you a little bit of urban policy graduate school. Just answer that and then we'll
Yeah, go for it. No worries.
Usually when you're doing a site visit, it's really understanding the neighborhood and getting a sense of the culture, the background, and talking with residents, talking with individuals or organizations that work with residents. And it really is also being a good listener, really picking up cues on things challenges or tensions that you are hearing that are existing in the community. Getting a sense of the history, and when I say history, I don't mean necessarily, more demographic information or, changes in race, or groups moving in and out. It's more or less what's the history that they've had in terms of organizing, what's the engagement, how have others engaged with residents, and is there a sense of agency? Some neighborhoods and communities, there is a sense of agency, and they are engaged and they understand what it means to be at the table, and they have a voice. And in some neighborhoods or communities, that's not as prevalent. They don't necessarily have that experience. And so you work with neighborhoods differently if they do have a sense of agency or if they don't. And how you engage them can be an empowering experience on either end.
That was great. You've only been out for 2 years, right?
But
it's been a busy 2 years.
Yeah, my career started in journalism earlier than that. So I honestly think that my job hasn't changed that much. I started as a journalist, mostly covering politics in the Basque Country, which is a region in northern Spain that was at the time going through like a political transformation, ceasefire announced by a terrorist group at the time that had been operating in the country for 50 years. So to me, my job was always, the way that I saw journalism, honestly, was as public service. And I saw that I just was a piece of the whole puzzle, trying to hold people accountable, and transitioning into activism. It felt really natural. It really felt that it was still about listening to people. It was still about conducting research and trying to find angles to make a complex reality understandable for people that not necessarily were interested in it. And that's what I do today. I think, lots of organizations and foundations come to us with a question of or maybe more than with the question, with the statement of, young people will never get interested in the issue that we are trying to tackle. And my answer is always they care about anything. Whenever we run surveys with young people, do you care about the environment? Do you care about gender issues? Do you care about racial issues? We are talking about young people 13 to 25. More or less, they care equally about any issue. So I don't think that the issue is the important variable when trying to engage new generations in cause. I do think it's more about how we engage them, provide them value, and a variable as simple as how to get their friends engaged in something is so key. We know that when we survey our members, 67% of our members say that they just did something, they engaged in a campaign that we designed for them just because their friends were doing it. So how can other organizations and other foundations that are trying to engage people to benefit from that knowledge, and how can we benefit from each other, right? Not just, it goes both ways. So that's my obsession, is to kind of help others to find the angles and the framings so issues resonate with young people, which are the future leaders of this country and the world. So how can we do that?
So what you just said about how can we engage with each other, and Anna and Evette both nodded, and so was Danielle, everybody was nodding. Yeah. We do have a very serious one might say, dire problem in the United States and other countries of the world of social fracture. And part of the problem with social fracture is people stop talking to each other. So since you kind of kicked this off, how do we even starting small in this room, how do we come to have some kind of shared perception of how we go forward?
I mean, one of the things that we are seeing personally do something, especially after the election, but also building up to the election, is that there's so many amazing initiatives and organizations popping up. And my feeling when I look at the work is that they seem to be, lots of them, like pulling like the same people in different directions and asking them, join my movement and join this other movement. And they seem to be targeting the same people, mostly liberals. And I think, in addition to that, I think that young people are just kind of naturally sorting them out in tribes and becoming a little bit more isolated. So my goal is my question, and Do Something's question is how can we break that, and how can we actually get them to collaborate across ideologies? In our member base of 5.5 million members, we have young people from all the ideological spectrum. Like, many of our members are conservative. So to give you more of a tangible example, we ran a campaign called Guns Out, and the goal was to get school administrators to commit to ban guns from college campuses. But we knew that we have so many members that belong to communities in which actually carrying a gun is something that they think they should be able to do. So we knew that when launching the campaign, we couldn't just try to get them to become super activists and get their school administrators to sign that. So we would ask the question of does any of your family members own a gun? And if the answer was yes, then maybe the conversation that we had to start was more about gun safety rather than getting their school administrator to sign that ban. So I think it's about trying to bridge the gap and trying to talk to them in a way that will really resonate. And it's not about being less ambitious, it's just about starting a conversation at a point that it makes sense for that person.
You got to be elected a town supervisor. Did I say that right? Town supervisor? Township supervisor. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
That always involves bringing some people together across differences, seeming differences. How do you do that work, and what are your recommendations for America going? How do we bridge this gap?
Well, one thing to remember is that although we're all on social media all the time, or most of us are, we also live in a place. So you live in a neighborhood. You have people who you see every day at your favorite coffee store. You have a neighborhood school and a neighborhood park. And I think one of the things, I've been a national organizer since 2009, but I'll tell you a secret, I'm actually a local organizer. I just take that to the national level at times, and ultimately all organizing is about relationships. And it's all about talking with folks. And so when I was in Washington, when I used to live in New York, I was extremely lonely in this town. I come from the Midwest. I came here and I knew very few people. I had a very bad housing situation. I lost all my money. It was terrible. And I started school and was facing this debt. So I had all this stuff going on. So what I used to do is folks would ask me for money and I'd say, hey, I'd be happy to buy you a sandwich if you would eat lunch with me, because I don't have anyone to eat lunch with. And so I got to know so many folks. In fact, the other day I pulled out poetry from a man who used to push a shopping cart in the Bronx, but he would come to Manhattan and he'd panhandle. And we became buddies, and he gave me this and he said, your art is needed in the world, Danielle. I hope you spread your gift. And I was looking at this, his name's Don, and I don't know if he's still around anymore, but he's one of maybe a dozen folks who I used to eat with regularly in New York. And so next time someone asks you for for some money, say, let's talk. Where are you coming from? What is up with you? What do you need? And that's part of how I came Township Supervisor. Folks don't really know what a township supervisor is. It's a peculiar form of government in the state of Illinois, where it basically funds the poorest of the poor in communities. And so what I'll be doing essentially is networking resources, providing advocacy, and providing direct checks, because I believe in direct checks, for the poorest of the poor in Urbana. And so I would encourage folks, to really look at the way in which the face of poverty shows up in their communities, and to connect with people, to have conversations, and to build relationships. The last story I'll just share is that I started a group called CU Citizens for Peace and Justice with an African-American couple and my girlfriend at the time. So it was a lesbian couple and an African-American couple in the Midwest launching a racial justice organization. And we changed our use of force policy. We kicked the police chief out. We got a civilian review board of police. We stopped tasers from coming to our town for 12 years and got the best taser policy you can get that exists in the country. All of this happened because two queer ladies sat down with two black folks and we talked about our shared interests, and they weren't completely shared interests. And we had a lot of conflict, personal, cultural conflict. We had cultural conflict. I won't go into all the details, but it was intense sometimes. And I remember my friend Martel coming to me and saying, I used to be a really homophobic person until I met you and Kim, and I just didn't understand. And I said, I used to be a really racist person until I met you, Martel and Carol. I really was. I didn't know I was. You never were supposed to say that as a white person, but I really had to confront it. And so I think that's one of the ways in which we overcome this. It's actually very simple. It's called friendship. And don't just stick with your tribe. Go and talk with folks who are not like you and listen and pay attention, and also check your privilege if you have it in all the various ways we have privilege.
Who's feeling it? She really put the ball in play.
I think she summed it up.
Where do you want to go with it, Evette?
Well, I think a lot of it is just, it has to do about not having judgment. And because usually if you have judgment, you already come with an assumption about a person, about their background, who they are. So it makes you less open to see and hear who they are and their experience, and to see that there's probably more commonalities between you than there are differences. And at the end of the day, you can respect the person's differences, and you go about the business in terms of making the change that you want to affect. But it doesn't have to be at the expense of the other person. They're going to do what they need to do, and you're going to do what you need to do. You can't necessarily change a person's belief system, but by being open and not judgmental, I think that you can try to meet somewhere in the middle, even though you do disagree.
So the issue of fractures, right? You're talking about social fractures. I think that the talent of through individual personal relationships causing community change and others, it's an enormous talent. I just wanted to say that, which I don't have, by the way. But the fracture, I think they've always been there. I think they're just more exposed, and we see the depth. At least I would say that's my sense, that we see the depth of the fractures that have been there. And the ugliness and the violence of the fractures. I do not know how to answer your question, like how to find a common point, but I'm very provoked, very motivated in that sense. Provoked. When Andrea was reading the bio, there was something about I'm participating in this commission in New York City, so I wanted to just offer that. It's a commission that the Speaker of the City Council names, an independent commission. Judge Lipman, who used to be the administrative judge in New York State, is heading this commission. It has 23 people, and the idea is it's to improve criminal justice. I say to put the word justice into the criminal system, and it's really our internal little name is to close Rikers Island. We identify Rikers Island as our local expression of mass incarceration. In New York City, there are some very paradoxical things that show the need for really in-depth conversations around the justice system. And one of them is that this compulsive incarceration of people has nothing to do with public safety. Rikers Island currently has almost 10,000 people, about 9,000 men and women, primarily men, 90-something% Black and brown men and women. And in the women's prison, Rose M. Singer, for instance, almost 75% are detained of women and young women and of all ages are detained on a pre-detention status. They are not accused of anything. They're just there because they couldn't make bail. So, and it is also true for men. And I could go on this forever. I'm not going to. Just to say that the commission came out with a series of recommendations that, first of all, shrink the number of folk that even get to go to a jail, and then talk about the ending of this enormous, brutal, violent site of kind of institutionalized violence. And that is for the people who are doing time and for the people who are working. Both, it's a complete energy of violence. And thinking about shrinking it in half, like to about 4,500 people, and then looking at jails as community-based, localized things where interactions with community, there are really restorative entities, not punitive entities. So this is going to be a great opportunity and a great challenge to see if we can engage in the city in a conversation throughout the boroughs, around that. So we've been going around. I just want to say that I went to Staten Island because people thought that that's the area where we'll have most difficulty with people accepting that. And it has a sense of a restorative justice, this kind of proposal, and it has a sense of each community taking care of their own. So we've begun these conversations, and I want to say I've been there twice already, so I'm engaged in this process. So I think that in a time of fracture, for me, it's best to go at it on a shared goal, and to see if we can weave our humanity and our also the process that humanizes and the process that dehumanizes all of us. So I'm not sure, what's going to happen in this current mode that, sense of political attack and the deepening of the fractures. But I actually think that it's a time for incredible action.
There was actually a story in the Times today that New York State is not going to send prisoners. They're not going to transfer prisoners from other parts of the state to Rikers Island because it's too unsafe. It violates too many rules. So that's quite a condemnation. We're going to open it up for comments from the audience in a second, but one last round. Deepening fracture, we're in a time of I would say, dire crisis in the nation and the world. And so the question is, what do you find particular about the New School experience and community that makes it well suited to growing and influencing continuing generations of leaders in activism, organization, and social justice? Please, take it away. Yeah, why don't you start?
I don't know, what a hard question. I think, honestly, in my opinion, I think that the New School will always be at the forefront in the way, or in the number of activists that it puts out there every year. I think that even when I compare myself to friends who maybe have studied international affairs in the city too, there's a different sense of what you should do with your life or with your career. I think that instills in you a deep sense of responsibility a need to really devote yourself to either, whether it's like your local community or maybe more like policy level work, but always in the advocacy front. So I'm really confident that the next leaders will come out of the new school and of the programs that some of us come from.
So I would be curious to know to what degree does the new school actually reach a little bit deeper? I mean, this is an institution of higher learning, but to what degree are we also engaged in those communities that we are trying to produce professionals to actually go and work in and be a part of, to bring about change? But how are we reaching in those communities and forming relationships with high school students in the high schools across, in the Bronx or in Brooklyn, and so that we're also connecting one-on-one, and so it's not just an academic exercise, it's not a lab or practicum, but it is a little bit more real. But it's more real in the sense that we're also empowering young people so that they understand what social justice is. They're building relationships with students, graduate students, undergraduate students who are actually studying this. So that would be my take, or my, I guess, challenge to the new school, is to ensure that this is not some clinical exercise, but it is more rooted in real relationships and real and communities that are real.
Ditto. I'm just going to say ditto. Totally.
Ditto. Okay.
Completely agree with this.
Ditto.
Okay.
Ditto. Okay. Everybody agrees. New school, you hear that? Danielle?
I think times of crisis are times, and we're in, like the crisis we're in is this fundamental contradiction between capitalism and vision of democracy that is multiracial and transnational, which is yet to be realized. So that big democratic project, not just the American or the capital D. And so I think at these moments, it's so important for us to ground ourselves in history. And one of the things the New School did for me, I focused on the history of Black politics with Adolph Reed. And I also was looking at nationalism and the faces it has with Nancy Fraser. And I feel like what was so helpful for me was to look at how history could have gone, what Reconstruction could have birthed, what the labor movement of the 20s could have made happen, and those seeds of possibility. And so I think right now it's time for us to dig deep, and I totally agree with it's reflection and it's connection, right? So it's time to reflect and go deep and think about where we come from and integrate the movement histories into the academic history. I'm going to push for that in New School, but also for us to then make those connections and to act. And so I think, academic institutions are under assault right now, right? And so this is not a time to circle the wagons. This is time to open up what it means to be an academic institution. This room looks very different than rooms I was in 1998 and 99. Honestly, there was almost no Black folks at the New School when I was in the graduate faculty. And but I was studying the history of Black politics at that time. And I think we have to just keep opening, and keep pushing, dig into our roots. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors.
I'm going to get an endorsement from you because I'm doing a project. 2019 will be the 400th anniversary of Black people arriving in Jamestown to be sold into bondage. So we're launching a project here at the New School called 400 Years of Inequality. And we're telling people to read Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States. So if I may, I'm going to ask you for an endorsement.
Sure.
Read history,
yes.
people.
Please.
Thank you so much. At this point, we want to take your questions to our revered panel here. Yeah, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Perhaps you could say your name and what school you're from.
Yeah, my name is Chance Brown, and I'm a graduate of
Andre? Andre, do you want to take the microphone to people?
Oh, what's up?
Get back. Well, you know, there were two comments that were made here that really resonated for me. One was the example that you gave when you were talking about when you did the survey with the young people and how you approach that. And then the other one was your experience, you know, with the black folk, as you said, and what you guys put together. And the reason why they resonate for me, and this really kind of relates to your question, Dr. Fullilove, about the idea of fracture. I really think that we've got to start in our dialogue with questions, right? Because oftentimes when we come from a place of advocacy, we have a platform, we have a position. But I think if we're going to actually figure out ways to come together and be more collaborative, then I think we're going to have to approach each other more from a place of question and getting to understand where you're coming from. Just as a point of, as an example, if you will. So I was living in New York for 17 years. You know, I went to Milano and so forth. But then, you know, I met my wife and I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And obviously the South is very different than, you know, up here. But what's interesting is that a lot of the kinds of concerns that you have in New York are the kind of concerns you have in Charlotte, right? But what gets lost sometimes is the fact that if you look at, say, Charlotte from the news, because, you know, Charlotte's been in the news here recently, you know, over the last several years, with a lot of things going on in that particular location. What you will find, though, is that it's multifaceted. Yes, what you saw on the news is true, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that are very different from that. And so I just bring that up just as a point of reference for our dialogue, is to, again, make sure that we're having a conversation and getting to know where each other are coming from before we say, I think I know who you are, because you may not know. And so it's about getting a little bit more dialogue. It's not just what you heard in social media, not just what you heard on the news. That's the full picture. And the full picture is only going to come through dialogue.
Yeah. Did anybody want to say anything in response to that? That was quite a complete thought.
Yeah, I guess.
Agreed.
One thing that I'm really curious about is how do we do that at scale? Because lots of us were talking, you were talking, and Anna too, and Evette, about like one-on-ones, but is that enough? Like, or can we somehow scale it? Like, I do believe in, like, there are problems that just repeat generation after generation. And if we find a solution that works, how can we scale it? And I just want to say tech for the sake of saying tech, but you know, we've seen that social media does not necessarily bring conversation or productive conversation among folks that maybe have sorted themselves out in different tribes. So is there an opportunity to create a platform? And I, of course, believe in do something to do that, right? But I'm sure there are so many other organizations that can do it, like to trigger those conversations at scale. Because one-on-ones, as much as I believe in those, and as much as I think that requires intentionality, but how can we bring it to the world and not just like to a few communities?
Well, I think one place
It's
to
just
start is
such a question.
just with approach. I mean, I think talking about approach can be at scale, right? I mean, the example that you gave, I think oftentimes, again, we approach things from the standpoint of, oh, I know what's going on. So you said it yourself, young people are X, right? Yeah. The thing is, young people are not just X, right? Until you ask young people what's going on. Yeah. So I'm thinking that's one thing that we can do at scale is the approach and talk about the approach. And then people operationalize that approach very differently, you know, in different spaces. But I mean, I think approach can be scaled.
Awesome. I think you had, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ashley, the wife of alum, but I thoroughly enjoy your conversation. So,
Thank you for putting
yes, that's right. I think it actually goes to your comment, and Ashley, your comment too about approach. And since we're here at the News School, I would love to hear from the panel. I think you sort of asked this question of your fellow panel mates. You know, what are the actual action steps that you can do around, you know, reflection and then connecting, as we heard. People talk about let's have a lunch together and let's have a dialogue together, but then there's so much more that happens after that. You talked about scaling it. Well, sometimes maybe scaling is not where we're at right now. There's a new situation that's happening in the United States that has not happened before. So it's wonderful to sit down and break bread and have a lunch and have a conversation and talk about feelings. But I wanted to hear from the panel, what are some action steps you can take when you realize you're under assault? And when someone has a gun to your head, are you really going to say, "Can I have a piece of bread with you?"
Can you help me understand a little more in terms of the context? Are you talking about someone with a differing viewpoint, or your opposition around a particular issue?
I think that one of the things that I've been hearing, I attended the lovely lecture by Bell Hooks, and I'm hearing the panel conversation, and it's very informative, but I don't see that there are conversations around action steps to lead to better social justice, as opposed to thinking through ideologies and helping us to reflect and connect. But when people's lives are at stake in the immediate, and it's no longer an ideological conversation, what are some action steps that here in this brilliant school, the New School, which is so rooted in social activism, what steps could you recommend that people take to move forward past the conversation?
I think this is just going to be my interpretation, or from my perspective. My work is far removed from being in that kind of immediate situation. But it's my understanding, if you have like-minded individuals, it's one, figuring out who they are. It's one about organizing or figuring out, okay, what action can we take to address this? How do we understand what it is that we want to begin to affect change in, and start there. Sometimes it's just, if it's, when you say it's immediate, if it's connecting with a community organization, being present and figuring out how can I help one understand what the issue is. How can I provide resource or information that maybe the community doesn't know or you don't know? And then take that and figure out, okay, how do I leverage my influence to affect change in this particular area? Is it one, getting the message out to others? Is it two, being a person who just takes some time and says, I'm going to volunteer with this organization because they're on the ground and they're actually doing something? And so it's seeing where that point of intersection where you can meet that point of intersection and do something that is in the moment. Potentially in the moment, it could be something that could be built upon. And so it's just finding that starting point and then moving from there.
I just wanted to respond that I think it's one thing to play defense and it's another thing to play offense. So from a defense perspective, democracy should be a practice for each of us in this room immediately if it isn't already. And that is, so it's not just a political structure, it is a practice and a culture. And so that means, as much as you don't like it, calling your legislator every single day and talking about how pissed off it is that you will not be covered in terms of your pre-existing conditions if they pass this through the Senate, right? So just waking up and being like, I have breakfast, I call my legislator, right? So that's part of defense, and that's not the whole picture, but that's a piece of it. And I think that what I learned from, if you've never been to city council, you won't go to city council. If you've never called your legislator, you won't call your legislator. So what I learned is that I try to get people who have never called to just call once, because I know once they've called, it's like something's broken through, and they're like, oh, it's my legislator. Okay, I can call it person. Now I feel comfortable doing that. And so just bringing folks into that political process is so important. Insufficient, but an important piece of it. The second thing has to do with digital defense. A big piece of what's going on right now is that we are massively networked, and there's a huge surveillance apparatus, thank you, Obama administration, that is now surveilling all of our movements and able to make interventions. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to protect people in terms of the digital security, undocumented folks, vulnerable folks, trans folks, Black folks, poor people. And so there's a whole kind of DIY thing that needs to happen around that piece as well. That's emergent, important issues. And then I think there's offense, and the offense piece is where I feel like that's where we're actually those one-on-one conversations, what you said, sir, where it's like you think you know what needs to happen. honestly, I've been an organizer for like decades, and I'm not sure what needs to happen right now. I just want to admit that. I mean, I've always had my agenda. I'm someone who always has an agenda. But like, do I really know what needs to happen right now? I know we need to play defense, but I honestly feel like it's in conversation, and that there's no slow route to democracy. That's what I would say. There's no shortcut. There's no like, you can just push a button and it goes emails 20 million people. Like, I really do think we actually have to cultivate a culture of democracy that involves having these conversations. And that's the offense piece, is develop our vision for what it is we're going to push for, which we have some good sense of that, clean air, water, healthcare, housing, but like how? How are we going to get to that point given the obstacles that we're up against? And how do we resist divide and conquer strategies in trying to get there?
Ooh. Good answer. Last question?
Yes. I just want to piggyback on that because
Do you want to tell everybody who you are?
Yeah, I'm Fred Hudson. I graduated in '75 from the School of Public Engagement. I think in terms of what the lady here said, my comment deals with just dealing with structures within the context of New School, because you have students who need internship programs and research ideas that can be placed within this context. Just one thing just came to mind recently. We all heard about the young man who was shot by a police officer with a rifle, who's now being indicted. But the reality of it is he had been brought before different disciplinary bodies beforehand. Now, I had an experience with the Police Civilian Complaint Review Board some time ago, in which I actually saw a police officer stop two well-dressed black men in a car and made them open up their trunk and look in the trunk. And I copied down the license plate of both the man who was stopped, the men who were stopped, as well as the police car, and I wrote a complaint on it and went down to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, gave sworn testimony, and about 6 months later, I got a letter back telling me that from an attorney saying that what I saw was not what I saw. Now, doctor, as a psychiatrist, I would like you to deal with that phenomenon. You understand? Because that's a contradiction of itself. But the reality is that there are students within the context of what you deal with as a professor of health policy, et cetera. There are students who are looking for research projects. If something could be done to actually involve students in the process of interviewing people after the Civilian Complaint Review Board, or during the process of giving testimony to resolve some of these issues. Because the reality of it is most of those cases are thrown out. And we know it's a rubber stamp. Mm-hmm. But the reality of it is, if something was done with the police officer who shot the young man in the head with the rifle, perhaps that young man's life could have been saved. So the reality of it is, I think, and one of the realities of this kind of board is that all of you now are out of school, basically, and you have jobs. Within the context of the structure that you have of being workers in the community, if you constantly look for ways of bringing students, researchers, et cetera, and networking among yourselves to look for points of intervention, then you go past the idea of democracy, but to the point of people seeing that there's a committed group of people, stakeholders on one level or another, who are constantly looking for points of intervention. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Wilson.
I'm looking to the bosses because I think it's 3:30 and we're supposed to stop. Is that true? Yes. I think this has been a fabulous panel, and I do think there is a concrete thing that I've learned this year at the New School, teaching a course called 400 Years of Inequality, which is that this is a time when I think most people, I would agree with you, I don't know what to do, but we do know we can ask questions, and we do know we can read history. And I want to suggest to all of you, get a bunch of friends and read Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Even if you've read it before, read it again, because it has lessons for this time and all the things that we've been talking about. We have to find our way forward, and let's do it humbly and with intellectual curiosity. And thank you so much for coming today.